All right. Congressman, first of all, thank you so much for making time for us at this conference. As at the Bitcoin Policy Summit, this is twice as big as it was last year. We've already had Congressman McHenry come talk to us, and Senator Lummis, as well as Senator Gillibrand about Bitcoin. I want to start with you with going right into a very complicated topic, because we don't know how long it will take, but you've done some really interesting work around a staff accounting bulletin that really affects Bitcoin. It's SAB 121. For those not familiar, it impacts how banks and other SEC reporting companies have to hold equal amounts of cash on their balance sheet against any custody amount of Bitcoin. And it was released as guidance, and it was ruled by the GAO later as a rule. And this really affects, now that we have Bitcoin ETFs, which the SEC got something right for us, how the Bitcoin ETFs...
They didn't do it, they did it grudgingly.
They begrudgingly got one thing right, yes. And so could you really took the leadership on this role, and you're helping push something in the House that would change this and dramatically change, I think, the way just Bitcoin overall would be custodied and also Bitcoin ETFs. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we've got tons of well-regulated banks that can't custody digital assets because of SAB 121. We've got everything in with one non-bank, which is a real concentration of risk problem. But I'm a Democrat, so for me, I'm leading with Congressman Flood, Senator Lummis on opposing SAB 121. We passed a bill out of the House Financial Services Committee with a slightly bipartisan vote. And now we got to move on with this. But this was, a clear overstep by the SEC. This is a place where Congress gets to make our voice heard, and it's an issue where I think we're going to see a pretty good bipartisan group of folks. But it's tough for me as a Democrat going against your own administration. So it's something I feel is very important that we get right, and I'm going to keep pushing to make this a more bipartisan issue. And conferences, groups like this, you have a great ability to push on these issues, as you continue to do your meetings and visit with folks here in Congress. So hopefully it's something that is higher on your list.
Yeah, one thing I think that's important is there were two major bills in the House: the Fit for the 21st Century Act regarding market rules around Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, as well as the Stablecoin Clarity Act. Payment Stablecoin Clarity Act. And interestingly, you were one of only a handful of Democrats that in committee voted for that. And I think it's important for people who might be starting to skew a little bit to think this is just the Republicans are the only ones that really care about Bitcoin. What made you decide, and what was that like a little bit? Because you had your ranking member, voting the opposite way.
No, I mean, this is a big deal for the folks I represent and the future of the digital dollar. We've got two bigger things going on. Stablecoin bill, which I think we're very, very close to getting done in a bipartisan way with Maxine Waters and the administration and the Fed and others. It's just a little bit of negotiation kind of on what a strong federal floor looks like, but it's smaller. So I hope I think that's one we got a good chance to get done in this Congress. And then the bigger issue is the Fit for the 21st Century Act, the digital assets bill, so the market structure bill, and this is one that Democrats should be much more excited about. As Democrats, we like regulation, and with crypto, love it or hate it, you should want regulation. You should want to have clear rules of the road, and right now we certainly don't have it. So nothing especially partisan about the bill. I think it's just setting clear regulatory guidelines so that we can keep that innovation and those jobs, and those consumer protections here in the U.S.
One of the things you mentioned was about the future of money and the digital dollar. I know you've spoken about that before, and for those of you who may not be aware, the Democratic administration that we have in the White House now has talked about a possible CBDC that I know there's a lot of privacy concerns and a lot of concerns in general in this room about. And you interestingly co-sponsored a bill about who would at least get to make that decision. Could you tell us a bit about your thoughts on sort of the future of money, the importance of the digital dollar, and why you co-sponsored that bill?
Yeah, sure. And I think as I hear about CBDCs a lot from folks around the country and my constituents. It's a polarizing topic. I think for anybody, as you're kind of looking at what you focus on here in Washington in this in this area of stuff, it's one I would focus less time on. We've got a lot more bigger fish to fry, and the where that sort of stands is we have a bill that I've co-sponsored that says only Congress should decide if there's a CBDC. I've talked about this with Jay Powell, privately as well, maybe publicly too, but their position certainly is exactly in line with ours. Only Congress should be the one to do this. This is something that's not going to happen anytime soon in Congress. So I think there are bigger things we need to do to keep innovation in industry and jobs here in the U.S. with stable coins, with the digital assets market structure. But those are the things that are, I think, better focuses of time. But the where that stands is pretty much everybody's agreed. This is something that Congress should decide about, and that's not happening anytime soon.
So one thing I think we all like about Bitcoin in this room is the fact that there's only 21 million of it, and we feel like you can't really manipulate that money supply, and a lot of people have that sense of feeling like sometimes maybe the Federal Reserve more awareness than any other generation, I think, of how it might affect their lives, right, with price inflation, things like that. And I want to relate this a little bit to sort of your story, because you're congressman, but you're not running again for another thing that was changed by people out of your control, which was gerrymandering. Maybe you could explain a little bit about that and why, at least for people here, we find Bitcoin special, because it feels like we try to prevent those things from happening.
No, I mean, a lot of challenges we got to deal with to make sure you have people in Congress who are responsive to their constituents. I won one of 6 Republican seats that we flipped in the last election as a Democrat. District that could have gone either way. The best ideas won, and then I was gerrymandered out of my seat just last year by a Republican majority in our state legislature. A district that went from R+2 to R+18. Just absolutely no way you can win something like that as a Democrat. So, focusing on getting everything I can done now, and this is certainly one of those issues that I think we have a good chance to get something done on in this Congress, and that will help the folks I represent in a very significant way.
Do you find your constituents ask you about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies more than before? What's that like?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely more in the news, especially with the Bitcoin ETF, which I think was a very good advancement on the issue. It's going to help protect consumers. Make sure that when they make those investments, they're not going to the Bahamas to try to figure out how to get their money back if there's a problem. So I think great first step, and hoping that we can continue on that trajectory with the SEC with options for the Bitcoin ETF, options trading, and an Ethereum ETF. So those I think are the next things to sort of look for in that space.
So one thing I know people wonder about, and a lot of my friends here are very interested in going to Capitol Hill while they're in town and talking to folks on the Hill. What's it like for when you talk to your other Democratic colleagues about things like Bitcoin and they see it a different way? Is it educational? And please coach us on what the right and wrong way is to approach Democrats in Congress about this issue.
Politics is really simple. It's just about educating people on an issue. If you educate people on an issue and explain it, they're going to be with you. And so you got to get through that first piece. The more you do that, the better you're going to do on an issue. A lot of it's sort of generational, unfortunately. Some of my much older colleagues in Congress just still using a flip phone. It's a lot for them to understand. Younger members, though, are a little more receptive. But what you need to do is just recognize that change doesn't happen in the halls of Congress. It only happens when people make their voice heard and they educate their members on the issue. So I think really important to talk about why it matters for you. Me as a Democrat, I want regulation. I want to protect consumers. That's what regulation does. And I represent a lot of communities of color, marginalized communities, where they spend a ton of their money moving their money around. And if we get this right, we are going to help make sure that people can transfer their money where they want it to go without paying these huge fees. And that's a great thing for Democrats and the folks I represent.
So our time is almost over, which seems incredulous. But just to talk about stablecoins for a minute, we've heard this morning from Senator Joe LeBran that we're likely to see a Senate version of a stablecoin bill introduced, and we heard a little bit about McHenry saying that as sort of a foundation. I know there was the market structure bill, but also, what are your thoughts on stablecoin legislation? How you think that could help with the space?
Yeah, no, I mean, really close. We are really close again. The negotiations are just sort of what's a strong federal floor look like. Folks like in New York, North Carolina, where I represent, we want to make sure our regulators, still have, are still involved in stablecoin. So, really close. I think we're going to get it done in a bipartisan way. Maxine Waters at one point said, recently, very, very close. That's a great sign. So, I think that's a positive thing. But for me, the thing we really need to be talking about is where the U.S. is going with the digital dollar in the next 10, 20 years. And if we continue to just bury our head in the sand, other countries are going to succeed, and we're going to see the dollar lose its status as the global reserve currency. And we do so well as a country because of the status of the dollar. And as we shift into a more digital economy, we need to make sure we're keeping that status, and stablecoin legislation is a really important piece of that.
So, you've been just a real ally to the space, and we so appreciate your leadership, particularly on the Democratic side. I know you can't talk about it, but I can say that you're not giving up, and that you're not going to run for Congress again, but you have announced publicly that you're running for Senate in 2026. And I think that this room could really use your leadership on the Democratic side as we move forward toward what's really, it has to be interesting because it's just forming the legislation from scratch about this new product. So,
I hope so. I think there's going to be a lot more work to do in the future, but it's something that we need to get right for consumers to make sure we're protecting consumers. And and they say when you announce you're not running, you're retiring. I'm not retiring. I'm 48. I've got a lot more work to do and a lot more I want to get done. So we're going to stay at it.
Great. Lots of luck, everyone. Congressman Wiley Nickel.
Thanks so much.